Hello and welcome to Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. I'm Becky Parker Geist and I'm your host. Audiobook Connection is your place to learn about the audiobook creative process in discussions between the authors, narrators, producers, and post-production teams that bring them all together, as well as guests who have listened to the audiobooks and have questions for the creative teams. This podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. And today I have with me Dan Flanagan. Dan is an attorney and is also the author of several books, including a couple we'll focus on today, An American Tragedy and Dewdrops. So Dan, welcome.
Great to be here.
So tell us a little bit about your background and the start of your journey as an author. What inspired you to become an author and how that journey began?
I'm not sure exactly what inspired me, but it was my reading as a youngster and extending into high school. I can remember in high school, sophomore in high school, it hit me like Saul on the road to Tarsus that I wanted to be a writer. I'm not sure why, really, I thought that or thought I was capable of it, but it really did seize me. The problem is I didn't know how to do that, or when and where do I enter and what do I write about. And so it was easy for me to get distracted away from it. And luckily, I ended up getting a fellowship, a graduate fellowship in history, and ended up doing that for a while and, got a PhD and taught college and that sort of thing. And just one thing led to another. I got a law degree at the same time as the PhD. Eventually, I decided to be a lawyer and on, all the time thinking I should really be a writer and making myself and unfortunately my wife as well unhappy a lot of the time because I didn't think I was doing what I was supposed to do in life. But I ended up at the end, more or less, being able to do it at a time when I had a lot more to write about than I would have had when I was 18 years old.
Right. Yeah, it sounds like you were in the process, unknowingly, but in the process of gathering the kind of input and information and experiences in life that would lead to the work that you ended up finally writing. Does that sound right?
You can only write so much about navel gazing,
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things that has really struck me in the work specifically, so we've produced An American Tragedy and Dewdrops. So I feel like I've gotten a really strong taste of your work through those two pieces. And one thing that really has struck me is that you're so good at writing dialogue. Do you find that challenging, that particularly challenging or easier? What's your experience in the writing of dialogue?
It's interesting. When I started to intensely get involved in writing, which was in the 1980s, I took a couple of years off of law school, the law practice. My wife and I started a drug and alcohol treatment center called Sierra Tucson in Tucson, Arizona. And during this period, I had enough time that I could really pursue some writing. And interestingly, I chose to write plays. And I don't know if that's because I thought it was a lot simpler to write some dialogue than write all the things around the dialogue. Obviously found myself very comfortable with that. And even today, when I come to a passage that I'm writing that I can do in dialogue, I'm always very happy because I know, number one, it's probably going to be pretty good. And two, it's going to give me some pages, a lot of white space in the dialogue situation. So I can't really explain it, but I'm very comfortable with it.
Yeah. I think for many writers, dialogue is the bigger challenge, to get it to sound realistic, true to what the way we actually talk to each other. And in the audiobook world, of course, we're hearing it live. So when dialogue doesn't flow well, it's more noticeable. And yours, I saw it from the start. When I first looked at your manuscripts, I was like, oh yeah, this dialogue really feels strong. And I believe that Dewdrops was produced, or at least as a staged reading, right? You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, yes. I wrote this group of plays at first during this period in the 1980s. One of which was about Eleanor Marx, the youngest daughter of Karl Marx, very interesting, tragic life, and another was about Alan Freed, who was the disc jockey who promoted rock and roll initially. And Dewdrops was set in a alcohol and drug treatment center. It's a tragedy, or I call it a tragedy. And I actually got a staged reading in New York of that play. But after that stage reading, I didn't know what to do or where to go with it. And theater is a full immersion, full-time thing. And I wasn't either ready, I wasn't knowledgeable enough, or anything else to go anywhere with that. So it sat for a while, and I just wanted to put this out in the world somehow. So I turned it into a novella, almost all dialogue, but with enough other text to, make sense out of it as a novella. So that's how Dewdrops came about in the form it's in now and in the audiobook.
Yeah. And then there are some other short stories that are pulled together into that collection. Tell us a little bit about those choices of the stories that are included, and what was your thinking around either how they're held together thematically, or, even just about the decision-making process, because I think that's really interesting in itself.
Yes, Dewdrops, the original publication was in 2019. It had the Dewdrops novella in the middle and two short stories bracketing it. And now I'm doing a revised edition, adding additional story and, making some changes as well, but in the other stories. But basically now it's 4 stories, one of which is called Some Cold War Blues. And it's about an 11-year-old boy in the 1950s dealing with a difficult family situation and his little adventures. And another one is the one I've just added. It's called Dude, and won't belabor the plot. And another one is about an old woman in Anchorage, Juneau, Alaska. The punchline there is old and broken Juneau with winter coming on. And then the Dewdrops novella. And I didn't really, until someone, I think it was you, asked me the question, what ties those stories together? Does anything tie them together? And I can't say that I intended it, but there is an overriding theme. It's a lot of people who are in very difficult situations, often self-made, and with life conspiring with their mistakes to make their lives difficult, and how they deal with that and cope with it. And, Hamlet, take arms against the sea of troubles sort of thing. And are they going to just wallow in their pain, or are they going to try to do something about it? And at the end, too, I was shocked to say that a lot of it's about love. And I don't mean love, which is an overrated thing and not hard to understand it, but the unselfish caring for the welfare of another human being is a miracle, and being cared for, no matter what, by another human being, despite everything, is a miracle, and there's some of that infused into these stories.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm struck as you're talking about not really planning out thematically. I'm struck by an experience I had as I was working on my novel, the last book that I released, where it wasn't until people started asking me, well, what's it about, that I found the words to describe what it was. I'd already written it. It's been through beta readers and everything, but finding the words to explain it helped me better understand my own work. So that was interesting.
Yes,
but
right.
Yeah,
it's a nice revelation that you're really getting somewhere with it.
Yeah. And as the narrator for On the Last Frontier, that, in Juneau, Alaska, I that what you just said about that love, that, the love of somebody trying to take care, somebody caring enough about you to really take action, as an expression of that love, to try to help that person, help take care of that person. So I would say profound in that story, because that's the one I got most deeply into as the narrator, as that character. It really is something, I think, worth calling out, because we get so, I think, often we're just, we can see, when we fall into romantic love, we can see, familial love. Those are all in a way obvious and beautiful, all beautiful. But this kind of expression of this other kind of love that's so miraculous is extraordinary. And I think it speaks to who we can be as people.
Something
beautiful.
Unselfish. Something that involves a little bit of sacrifice. And not just trying to, I love you, to manipulate, control, and make you do what I want you to do.
Right. And also, sometimes we think of the caring of one person to another, or of another, is, someone who may be more equipped, more, socially adept, more stable. Often it goes the other way. It's often the people who maybe have less of that can be such good models in a way of this kind of caring. And that's one of the things that I experienced in that story. It also makes me think sometimes of people who are considered special needs, or, neurologically diverse, that there are gifts there. And the kind of love that is expressed it just can be so beautiful. And
Reuben in that story is who I think you're referring to. And something you may not know, but I think you'll like. Reuben means, in the original Hebrew, behold a son. And when you think about the rest of that story and Katie's situation, that I want to find a way to tell people that without telling, so.
Yeah. Let's just take a short pause, and then we're going to come right back and talk more about the audiobook production itself. No good deed goes unpunished. In the scorching summer of 1988, amidst the frenzy of the Satanic Panic gripping the nation, Private Detective O'Keefe finds himself thrust into a trial like no other. As he strives to establish his fledgling agency, the last thing he anticipates is being drawn into a harrowing legal battle. But when Virginia Montrose, Miss Ginny to her students and his daughter, Kelly's most beloved teacher, is accused of heinous crimes against her current and former students, O'Keefe faces a moral quandary unlike any before. Despite the risks and the overwhelming stigma, O'Keefe's encounter with the shadowy child protection figures driving the prosecution sparks a fierce determination to seek truth and justice. In this gripping tale of courage and conviction, O'Keefe's resolve is put to the ultimate test as he confronts the darkest facets of human nature and dares to challenge the prevailing hysteria. O'Keefe must summon every ounce of his strength to uncover the shocking truth while struggling to reverse the relentless tide of injustice. Get your copy of the audiobook of An American Tragedy and Dan Flanagan's other books, including Dewdrops and the first books in the Peter O'Keefe series, at Amplify Audiobooks, the equitable audiobook platform. So let's talk about An American Tragedy first. This was a project where, as we went into it, we talked about different ways of approaching it. And the initial production path was to have two narrators, a male narrator, female narrator, doing each. So the narrator, A.W. Miller, was recording the narrative and then also all the male voices. And then Jen McCool was doing all of the female voices. We came to a point in the review process where it felt like a shift needed to happen. So I want to ask you about that and what you were feeling at the time. We've talked about dialogue and the importance of all of that. Tell us a little bit about how you started to shift what you felt needed to happen in the process.
To establish the context, An American Tragedy is the fourth book in a private detective series. The protagonist is Peter O'Keefe, and his whole thing is sort of a fall and redemption story. And American Tragedy is he's on the redemption road, more or less. And the other three books, the first one's called Mink Eyes, the second one, The Big Tilt, and the third one is On Lonesome Roads. And I had each one of those as an audiobook. In every case, they were well done, good narrator, good production, all that. But I wasn't entirely satisfied with the multiple voices being done by one narrator. No matter how good that narrator is, it's really hard, especially if you have a lot of voices, to really get across two different people talking to each other. And especially, again, no matter how good you are, of crossing genders, the male doing the female and the female doing the male. So I really wanted to do. Initially, we planned Dewdrops, the novella former play, as a full cast production because that's what I wanted to do. But once we got into American Tragedy, the one thing I wanted to do to start was to have two narrators, one male, one female. As it developed, and I got myself in very deep here, as I listened to the original draft, I guess we'd call it, I thought, I want more. And that's expensive, but it was really valuable, I think. I think we're going to come up with a very nice production with just well done all the way around, multiple characters, multiple voices, and so on. And I doubt you want to encourage your authors to do this, but it ended up that on some of the revision, I actually, instead of waiting for you to give me a product, I was involved in the production, and that helped a lot. It really did. And I think I'm right about this. I don't think I interrupted very much or wanted things that much change, at that point. But once it's done, it's just hard to deal with.
That was great. And I like for our listeners, one of my great goals is to help address any questions that authors may have as they're entering into this process or in the middle of it or wherever they are with it. But to know that there are places where they can go where you can make that kind of big shift and still, we didn't have to scrap everything that we did. Not at all. We had so much good work, and then it was finding the ways to take it to the next level, to enhance it? Like which were the characters that would be, that if we added in an additional voice, that the whole production would just really lift up? And it was exciting part of the process. And for our listeners, so what we did was we had directed sessions for those replacement characters where you, Dan, were able to sit in for those and be able to listen. So we could actually make sure that what the actors were delivering was on target.
The one thing I'll say, and I learned this in the original stage reading of Dewdrops, and I've learned it more and more in each of these audiobooks, good actors reveal things to you as the author that you didn't really realize, and they bring things out in ways that makes you say, well, I guess I did mean that, but I didn't really know it. So it's a great enlightening process to be involved in. On the other hand, actors don't always get it right, right in the way you intended. It may be right, but not the way you intended. And I think that's what we were able to come up with here, is a great match between actors making their valuable contribution but the author getting involved enough to get it the way he wanted it.
Yeah. Also, I just wanted to circle back to something you had said about these characters and being in difficult situations that they have sometimes helped create for themselves. And I think that is the stuff of great drama. When we as humans or as characters, fictional, non-fictional, when we're put in those really challenging situations, when we're like pressurized, that's when we learn a lot about ourselves. We learn a lot about each other. And typically those are the points that we look back on as points of great growth for us. So it's real interesting to see characters because go through that process, I think, in part because it helps us see in ourselves when those moments happen.
Yes.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you a little bit about, this is sort of coming back to the question of theme, but not necessarily, but like, what would you really like for your readers, for your audiobook listeners to come away with? What kind of experience do you want them to have, or what would you like for them to gain, or the kind of impact you'd like to have on them?
Yes, and we've talked a lot about Dewdrops and the stories there, but these O'Keeffe stories and American Tragedy specifically I hope they come away thinking that was a great book. But it's about real situations, or at least realistic situations, with people grappling with difficult situations and interesting themes. I mean, the whole O'Keeffe series begins in 1986, and my notion is to continue that group of characters as far as I can take it, right up to our present times and in their lives and as it develops. And so I hope they're saying, well, it's dealing with important real life things, and it's interesting and maybe even exciting.
Yeah. I was very struck myself with An American Tragedy in particular. That's what's on my mind right now, about how frustratingly tragic that whole, I will say, trial is, and good for us to recognize. I think one of the things that you highlighted is how important it is in the justice system to have judges that are impartial, that haven't already come into this scenario with their minds made up, and also the importance of evidence that is complete.
Yeah. An American Tragedy is about the Satanic Panic of the 1980s and 1990s, in which a lot of innocent caregivers most child sexual abuse occurs in family or relational situations. These were, and it's not that it doesn't happen, but there were many of these that were in childcare situations, preschool, school, babysitting, that sort of thing. And a lot of innocent people ended up being jailed, convicted. And the whole thing is a great lesson in how we need to examine our premises, our assumptions, our prejudices that warp our view of reality. And then we manage to warp reality itself by our own behaviors. The tragedy is that here.
Right.
The tragedy is America. The tragic hero is America, and what it went through then, and it resonates a lot with a lot of what's happening today.
It does.
One of my epigraphs at the end of the book is by Louis Brandeis, and it says, "The greatest dangers to liberty lurk in insidious encroachment by men of zeal, well-meaning but without understanding." And that's a lot of what an American tragedy is about.
Yeah, so well put. Thank you. What would you say, sort of just, I want to wrap up a little bit on the audiobook process. What would you say was the most surprising thing for you in the process overall for either of the books or both? Yeah,
yes, right. Well, I was most happy with, and I'll warn everyone that it costs money to be this way, but I was so happy that I could have an influence on the process in a meaningful way, and not just a few little changes at the end that I had to accept kind of the whole thing no matter what. So the flexibility was great. The whole pro audio thing, though, and amplify and so on, that the reason that I chose you guys is not only a good production process, but the ability to have it on every other form when we distribute it, so that it can be, anybody can get it anywhere. It's a great benefit.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. And where can our listeners learn more about you and your writing? I want to share your website.
My website is Dan Flanagan Books. Very simple. Only complication is Flanagan has a bit of an odd spelling, Flanigan, danflanaganbooks.com. And I'm not advertising for Amazon, but the Amazon author pages have some significant information. You know, people can go on there and get nice little summaries of the books, but they can also get it on my website.
Yeah, great. And of course, the best place to get the audiobooks is Amplify Audiobooks. That will provide the most benefit to Dan in helping him continue his writing journey and creating all this great content for us.
Yes, and a good thing about the way you guys operate, I'll be able to put all 3 other books on there so that people can go to one place and get them all, if that's what they want.
Yes, absolutely. Beautiful. All right. I'd like to just ask if, is there anything else that you might have, you kind of wished I'd asked about? Any things you wanted to share, but I didn't ask directly?
No, not really. I mean, the Peter O'Keefe series, I want to plug that because it's real people dealing with real life, but in an exciting, exciting way. That was the whole point of it. The original book's a kind of late coming of age story with a really troubled guy, but he's now moving through life.
Yeah. And again, I just want to highlight for our listeners, because it was so noticeable to me. We do a lot of audiobooks. I see a lot of manuscripts, and your dialogue is really powerful. Very excited that we're going to have the Peter O'Keefe series on Amplify Audiobooks, and just especially highlighting An American Tragedy and Dewdrops. And Dan, I want to thank you so much for spending this time with me today.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. Please take a moment to subscribe at audiobookconnection.com. The podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Learn more at proaudiovoices.com. Again, thanks for being with us, and please join us next week.